Thank you, everybody, and a very warm welcome to today's panel discussion on New Economy, New Focus, sponsored by U Capital. It's lovely to see so many of you here today, and we are going to look at our options for creating that new economy of the future, which will build on West London's growth to date. Just while our last few people come into the room, we are going to look at debating today with our key speakers what are the main drivers for the region's success, how will West London differ from the UK in terms of its offer going forward in order to keep it successful, and how can our industries be supported to enable sustainability and resilience and attract new business. We'll try to establish some of the priorities for our industry going forward. I'd like first of all to introduce our speakers. So we have here today Lloyd Lee from U Capital, who are developing Olympia, and we look forward to hearing the latest from Lloyd. We have Prema Gurunatham from Upstream, whose mission is to transform Hammersmith and Fulham into a leading destination for science, tech, and creative industries. Michelle Jenkins from Film London, which promotes London as a filmmaking destination. Neil Bridgen from London and Partners, which promotes London as a whole as a leading destination for foreign direct investment. And we have Katie Bell from Middlesex, who's going to help us understand how universities can help us with the skills and employability that we need to drive our industry forward. Just before we get underway, I would very much like us to answer a few polls so we can understand the background to this. So the first poll we are going to look at is looking at the UK as a whole, and I'd really like people to let me know what they think, which sector will be the most important for growth in the UK. So it feels like I should have some countdown music, but could people vote now, please? Well, the strong votes are coming in for green, creative companies, and digital technology. Votes still coming in. And we will close the vote in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Very, very strong vote there for the digital technology. We're now going to run a second poll, because that was technically a question about the UK as a whole. West London is obviously very strong in specific sectors. So we're going to run a new poll here, which is which sector does our audience and panelists think will be most important for growth in West London? And please vote now. This will help us inform our conversation as we go forward. Not massively surprising, although we do have some differences, which is very interesting. So the majority of the votes coming in for this one are for our screen-based companies, such as film and gaming. Pleased to see construction will be an important sector for growth in West London. That didn't feature massively for the UK, and also digital technology. Thank you very much. We will end polling in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. It looks like we have our attendees in the room now, so we will get on to the main business of the day. Can I ask you all that initially we are going to put questions to our panel, and they're going to talk to us about some of their ideas about our new economy and our new focus, and then we will move into a full Q&A session. I'd be very grateful if those of you that want to pose questions to our panelists can use the Q&A function in Zoom, and that way it's much easier for me to keep track of the questions and I'm less likely to lose you. If you would kindly maintain the chat just for things outside the actual Q&A, that would be very helpful. Also, as we get later into the session, you will be able to put your questions in a more traditional way by actually speaking to us. And if you wish to do that, I'd be very grateful if you could raise a blue hand. But first of all, I'd like to turn to our sponsor for the day, Lloyd, who's going to give us a little bit of background about the work you are doing at Olympia and how that's going to support the relevant growth sectors in West London. Lloyd.
So hopefully everyone can see that. Let me just do full screen. So welcome to Olympia. And I think rather than go through the full presentation, I'll give some quick highlights just to make sure that we get to the heart of the matter, which is really about economic growth. The The big picture here is what you see before you represents about 1.4 billion pounds worth of investment. Construction has already begun in January. We are on schedule. We've been building all the way through the COVID environment, working very carefully with central government and local government. And really what this is about is taking the exhibition halls, which are the two glass barrel vaulted roofs that you see towards the front and right of the massing here, which were built in 1884, and really expanding that vision to add 5 live entertainment venues, over 500,000 square feet of offices, about 100,000 square feet of restaurants and live kind of entertainment, smaller experiential spaces, 2 hotels, and also adding about 2.5 acres of public realm for people to be able to wander and come to Olympia without necessarily needing to go see a show. And if you think about what I've just said, it probably means in terms of shows, Olympia today is host from anywhere from 1 to 3 shows on any given day. We will increase that with all the live entertainment venues to probably closer to 7 to 10 shows daily of various kinds, whether it's, we're hoping to open a jazz club. We're looking at opening a live theater, which will seat 1,500 people, a music venue, which will host anywhere from 1,000 to a few thousand people standing room only. And as a result, we think that what happens with doing this level of investment and this level of scale is you are creating kind of an economic driver that then feeds on itself to encourage other businesses to come, other businesses to grow. So Olympia then becomes kind of the pebble in the pond that creates that ripple of the economy, which we think is a very powerful thing. It's been doing that for probably 130 some odd years as an exhibition hall. And we think that by adding all of these uses and creating a real destination, it can do that and more. And we believe that in a major capital city like London, these kinds of investments are important because they do create critical mass. They do create world-class resources and infrastructure, which the city obviously needs to be able to continue to grow and offer the world the best of what London and the UK has to offer. And so for us, we're very proud to be working very closely with all key stakeholders to deliver Olympia, and we expect to be open in the next 4 years. So that is really kind of the nub of what Olympia is. And what I will do is just very quickly spin through a couple of the key images. If you were to go to this space today, you would see nothing but mechanical equipment. There's literally acres and acres of mechanical equipment on the roof. And believe it or not, a lot of it doesn't even work. They were just too cheap to take it off the roof. And what we're trying to do is really create an open public space. This space here can probably house as many as 7,000 people standing if you really wanted to on any given day. I don't think we'll have anywhere near that level of people up here, but that's the sense of scale of what Olympia has to offer that has been hidden away for 130 years that no one ever even knew existed. And we're working very hard to bring it back into public use, and we're very, very excited about that. As you go through this presentation, you'll see a little bit more about some of the things I talked about. The various different building blocks that are shaded here in color are actually all new. They are not either existing today or they're not even being used today. And so for us, looking at the 2 gray blocks and realizing that the rest of all of the color around it today is not in use, that for us is an exciting opportunity to really give something back to London and to the UK generally that we think for hopefully another 130 years, people will really use and make the most of. And we're very, very excited about that. This tells you a little bit about Olympia today. This is in the original Grand Hall, the very first one built in 1884 when it was actually still the Queen's Vineyards. And today it continues to trade as an exhibition hall and I think is host to some 225 shows a year. We talk a little bit about how we actually came up with this vision, very much working with local stakeholders, and I mean local. We invited 6,000 local area residents almost monthly for 2.5 years. And other than for COVID, we would still be doing it. And so now we're doing virtual meetings with our local area residents to keep them involved. But we genuinely meant community involvement when we first started out doing stakeholder engagement in 2017, 2018. And we're very proud that some of the best ideas at Olympia actually came from our neighbors. This tells you a little bit about kind of the way that we've gone about actually creating these beautiful images and a lot of these wonderful spaces. We actually did it very much in conjunction with our neighbors, many of whom are either in the borough today or want to be in the borough and are looking for a new home in West London. And as you can see by virtue of this map, we didn't actually have to, we'd love to take credit for all the wonderful things we did at Olympia, we're going to do at Olympia, but the reality is West London already had that level of creativity, that level of commitment, that level of appetite for growth and investment. We just happened to be the facilitators of a substantial portion of it in finding a new home for it here at Olympia. And so in many respects, what we feel is the most important thing we can do on calls like this is ensure that we're all communicating, because you have various different stakeholders on this call where people have needs and requirements, they have strategies, they have business plans, and we have our own, but we also have capital. And as a result, we'd like to find a way to put that capital to work in West London, but we obviously need to work with partners to do that and to do that properly. You may or may not have seen that about 2 weeks ago, we announced that we took a 75.5% controlling stake in Shepherd's Bush Market, another major West London asset. It's probably fallen out of a lack of love for the estate. It's fallen a little bit in disrepair over the last 10 years or so. And we are very proud to be part of the heritage of Shepherd's Bush Market now. And we'll be, hopefully over the next coming years, working again with stakeholders and local area residents and local area communities and businesses to build a new story for Shepherd's Bush Market, which will celebrate the heritage of the original traders who continue to trade there since, I think 1914 is when they first started trading at Shepherd's Bush Market, but really trying to polish that entire area and continue to invest in it. So that literally takes you through a snapshot of what Olympia is all about and the things that we're trying to do. We're very, very excited. We expect again to be done in 2024. And if the current level of activity at Olympia is any proxy for what the future of West London looks like, it is going to be quite a bright future. There are 85 firms working full time and a couple thousand people on the Olympia project now. And that includes 11 global names in live entertainment, hospitality, and the creative industries, as well as great local names in live entertainment, hospitality, and the creative industries. And we're very, very excited. So that's us.
Thanks very much, Lloyd. That's really interesting to hear what's going forward. We're going to come back to you later with a few questions. And while we go on to talk to some of our other panelists, just a reminder to our delegates that if you want to ask any specific questions to our panelists, please pop them in the Q&A feed that you've got on your webinar, and we will get to those shortly. I'm going to come to Neil next. Now, West London has been quite a driver of growth recently, but clearly this year we've had a bit of an economic shock. So I was wondering if you could let us know, what are the key sectors which are currently attracting international investment? Because I'm hoping there is still investment coming into West London, despite what's happening in the world. And what do we need to do to continue to attract that kind of investment following COVID?
Thanks, Joanne, and thanks for the opportunity to join you this morning, and good morning to everybody on the line. As you say, London and Partners' role is all around promoting London as the best place to set up, to scale, grow your business and internationalize from. It's a pretty challenging remit right now, as you said, but I think the positive story there is, we are still seeing a lot of interest in London. We are still seeing a lot of interest in the traditional sectors that we have worked in. Decisions are taking a little longer to land, and when they do land, they're coming in a different kind of way with probably fewer jobs than we've seen in the past. But there's definitely still interest in London as an FDI, an inward investment proposition. So let's get that out there, I think, straight away. There is a lot of positivity in amongst the kind of doom and gloom that we see around us right now. Our focus is very much around technology. It's around innovation, high growth companies, and as I say, attracting them to London, working with them as they scale further and then internationalize. And I think something that is closely aligned to the strength of West London. The sectors that we work are technology-rich, innovation-driven kind of sectors, and that is what drives the West London economy. As we've seen in the poll, the viewers also kind of agree with that in terms of the future prospects too. I think the coronavirus pandemic has demonstrated the fundamental importance of technology and the role that it plays in society today. As it went into lockdown, tech played a key role in keeping businesses open, families connected, and it will have an even greater role to play going forward, I'm sure. And London's in a great position, I think. It's got an array of tech companies that are driving innovation, leading those conversations, and it's our job to make sure that London is at the forefront of those conversations going forward. We've reviewed, as many investment promotion agencies have done, our focus at a sector level and at a market level over the last 4 or 5 months to make sure that we are well positioned and we are placing our money on the right bets going forward. So we've reviewed sectors across the board to see how they're responding to the pandemic and what their future growth potential looks like right now. I think all of our crystal balls are sometimes a little cloudy, but we've tried to make most sense of all of the insight, all of the intel, all of the reports that are out there at the moment, and make sense for London and for West London. So just looking at the 4 areas that we focus on from a sector point of view and what's going on right now. Creative, incredibly important sector for London and for West London. And what we're seeing there is really strong growth, not surprisingly, around immersive technologies, around digital, around streaming and content, and around e-commerce and retail tech. Within the creative sector, for us, those will be the areas of focus going forward. And again, they play into the West London economy really well, really very well. From an innovation and life sciences perspective, another area that we focus on heavily, EdTech, we've seen prove extremely resilient and going from strength to strength. Again, not surprisingly, it was a major focus for us during the London Tech Week over the last couple of weeks, as some people may have seen. A lot of the content that we delivered over London Tech Week was around the opportunity in London and in the UK for EdTech, and also around MedTech, health tech, and we're seeing and we're doing a lot of work around kind of the importance of AI in life sciences going forward as well, and building our proposition out around that, which again plays to the West London strengths. FinTech, not surprisingly, will be a massive opportunity for us. It is and continues to show a lot of resilience, which is great. But within that financial and professional services space, we're seeing real resilience and growth around cybersecurity, video conferencing, and software as a service, I suppose, in the broadest sense, not surprisingly again. And then finally for us, urban, which is around kind of mobility, clean mobility, future mobility, as companies are responding to consumer sentiments around movement of people. I think that micro-mobility kind of sector will be one to watch going forward. And as we build back better and greener, that whole clean tech sustainability piece, I think, will be very, very interesting, and a sector of real strength and an opportunity for London to position itself ahead of the curve, I think, in that space going forward. So I think a lot of positivity in terms of the interest in London and in West London, and I think we've got a really good sound evidence base now for where we place our money and our bets going forward, and where we will be active in campaigns and lead generation and promoting London globally.
Thanks very much, Neil. It's actually quite interesting to hear about sort of the sectors within the digital sectors, from immersive tech through to digital and health, and of course the changes in mobility. I also think it's an interesting point, perhaps we can pick that up later, as we start to look at our new economy and new normal, whether or not we can actually, rather than try to put back the economy as it was, take advantage of the break we've had in order to achieve some of the sustainability goals that we said we wanted to achieve before this all started.
Absolutely. I think we've seen what a future kind of sustainable economy could look like during the pandemic. That's one opportunity that I think we need to seize going forward as we build it back. Absolutely.
Thank you. Can I move on to Prima now? I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about Upstream and what have been the challenges and indeed the opportunities that you've seen this year for the companies and for your creative hubs.
Yes, of course. Upstream is actually a partnership between Hammersmith and Fulham Council and Imperial College, and we focus on the science, tech and creative industries. And our mission, as you mentioned, is to turn the borough into a leading destination for those three sectors, and to also help transform White City into an innovation district, leveraging Imperial's growing footprint in that neck of the woods. We've been going for just over 2 years, and we have our roots in Hammersmith and Fulham's industrial strategy, which I think Councillor Cowan would have spoken about earlier this morning. And we focus on these three sectors, science, tech and creative, because for us, they are the ones which are predicted, and there's so much you can read into predictions, predicted to be the sectors that will continue to grow in an evolving economy. And a changing economy, which, if you believe a report, I think a couple of years ago by Dell, 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 don't exist today. I think what we best describe Upstream as is, if you want to get this new economy more quickly, and an important thing about this new economy is collaboration and partnership. And the best way to describe what Upstream is we're basically a catalyst for partnerships or collaboration. We bring people together, we convene them, we connect them. We try to get them to talk about innovation if that's what they want to talk about. But there's also a slightly mundane element of common challenges that people in a particular geographical location or particular sector may face, and actually that bringing them together does help address a problem. Your other question of how the Upstream community has done out of the pandemic, the creative side, I think, I'm almost going to leave the next speaker to talk about. Suffice to say that it is, the creative side has been hit. And it's not just the people in front of the stage, it's also the digital creative side. And, what I think my concern in this particular regard is people going off to find other jobs, and that will be a challenge we will face in due course. But also, if you look at the enablers in the digital economy, so talking about the people who service perhaps slightly old school or long-standing areas in the industries. So if you're a website designer, a website developer, what we have found is that some of them have seen quite heavy losses in major contracts, and they've seen some new business coming in, but not quite of the scale to replace one major loss of contract. So that's a creative side, and I think I'll leave it to the next speaker, apart from noting that. I think the positive side is that we are people, we're social human beings, we like culture, we like going to the theatre, we like going to the cinema, and I suppose I'm banking on that appetite for a renewed cultural lease on life, that people will go out and spend money and help rebuild this beautiful thing that we've got in London, this wonderful heritage, and not just a heritage, but also a great future. The tech side, moving on to that, is more positive. I think the previous speaker mentioned, and what we have also seen in the borough is that the edtech companies, the fintech companies, have continued to do well. And TechNation, sent a report out a couple of months ago and said, there are 90,000 vacancies in the tech sector each week. And, that's a sentiment I think our guests this morning have said, actually, tech is where we're putting our money. And more than that, I know it's been a lot of horrible news, but there's also been a 36% rise in vacancies in the tech sector, which perhaps indicates an uptick in sentiment. So the last bit of, Upstream is science, tech, creative industries. On the science side, it's continued to plow on, particularly the people who are working in laboratories. They have to go in, they've got that work to do, and they have somehow managed to, mess around with schedules, safe distancing, and working things out. The focus for the science sector is not too dissimilar from the tech sector in terms of challenges and things they're having to do differently. So for me, it's threefold. First of all, people are having to start funding rounds a little sooner, because investor sentiment is still a little cautious, not willing to dip a foot, never mind a toe in the water so much. The second thing both science and tech companies are looking at is new clients, because some pipelines have dried up. And I think for me, there's a very sharp contrast. The first 4 weeks of lockdown, people were very optimistic, and talked to them 6 weeks later, it was distinct change in, I can see it's not going to be all rosy. And the final thing, though, the science and tech companies we talk to are looking at is a change in tech where they have a product which could potentially aid the fight against COVID-19, so as a treatment or as some kind of amelioration or detection. So I think all in all, it's a slightly mixed bag across all three sectors and certainly within each of them.
Thanks very much. That does very nicely lead us on to Michelle, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the impact that COVID has had on the creative industries and how we're going to deal with getting out of that. I mean, I know that I'm always particularly pleased when I watch a movie or a TV show and it presents London, in particular bits of West London, well, because it's just a really nice piece of promotion. So I will start to enjoy the fact that anybody is producing anything in the near future. And hopefully we can still get them back to our cultural centre of West London. Over to you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Joanne. Yes, and there's a lot more of West London that appears on TV than you would realise, because London doubles for many, many other places, and you wouldn't have a clue. And not to mention the cluster of studios that we have in West London as well, from down in Twickenham up to West London studios, and above, and quite a few other bits and pieces of warehouses that are being recommissioned into studios build space now. In terms of COVID, so I mean, last year London had 1.3 billion overseas spend come in to the city, purely overseas stuff. That's kind of the large majority of what we deal with, but that doesn't account for all the domestic production that we also deal with. So the spend value is actually a lot higher. And history-wise, you'll understand the history of filming in West London, not least because the BBC is based in White City. Now that all came to a halt in March, but it hasn't gone away, and they are desperate to come back. In fact, we've just got a bit of a concertina effect now, really, where they've not gone away. They're all desperate to come back, and in fact more so, because they're basically trying to fit a year's worth of production into 5 months. So everyone been sitting at home during lockdown. What have they been doing? They've been watching TV, and the thirst for content has rocketed throughout lockdown. We've got to make that content. It doesn't come out of nowhere, despite what a lot of people seem to think. So there is a massive desire for productions to come back. They are already here, where we're slightly different to other creative industries who have struggled terribly. And, our heart goes out to the likes of the events world, the theatre world, who are just starting to grapple with things and work out what they're doing. We've been fortunate that we've got straight back into it. We devised guidelines that were COVID secure, got them to government, and on the 1st of June got the sign off that we could go ahead back to work. And we've not stopped since, basically. We're back to the sort of closure of, for example, Millennium Bridge a couple of weekends ago for War of the Worlds coming in. So it's full pelt. I've got a lot of productions now asking me for space come January, February, March time. They're all just sort of gearing up into their prep time. And of course, that means West London, huge demand. It's got the history here, it's got the crew based here, and that is absolutely crucial. If you're from LA, you want to know that your production has some real expert crew behind it. And that's what West London is really, really strong on. And also facilities. We know the Angel Costumes Depot is in West London, their Panelux is in West London, all the hub of facilities is all on that side of town. So that's really where West London can hugely help. Stage space is my big bugbear, and there'll be many people watching this right now who know that I've already asked, please give me space. And I know West London is not easy to provide that a lot of the time, but we are desperate. And I think the industry has changed. It used to be that they would only want something for 6 months or so. Now we are looking for a lot longer lease periods. Real commitments from the SVODs, that streaming video on demand companies. So from Apple, Amazon, Netflix, of course, huge, HBO, all desperate to get a foot in. NBC Universal as well. Even with NBC Universal, with their new studio that's going to be developed up in Elstree, are still knocking on my door virtually every day, wanting space for now and for the next 5 years or so, and possibly longer. So that is where the pinch point for us is really on space. And I think touching on perhaps what Neil was talking about earlier, and also what Lloyd has highlighted, what Olympia can do and what's already there, is that you have a studio. It does create a hub and a cluster, overused words at the moment, but it really does create that geographical focus. And that's traditionally what West London can provide in terms of Ealing and studios, etc. But if we have more of that, it will continue to retain the talent that we have behind the camera already, and all those facilities and all those businesses that benefit from the secondary spend businesses as well.
Thanks very much. I'm going to go on to Katie now, because it seems to me what's come out a lot of what we've heard so far is the need to protect the skills that we have, and also the reskilling of other people, and how universities can perhaps help aid us keeping those skills and keeping us at the forefront of these particular industries. Katie, how can universities link with our local hubs in order to help them recover? And how do you work with the boroughs in order to make sure that you can meet that skills need?
Thank you. Well, you know, I think each university is different, and we've all got different relationships within the boroughs. But picking up on Prima's point earlier and what Upstream are doing between Hammersmith and Fulham Council and Imperial University is a great example, I think, of a partnership between the education providers or the skills providers and the boroughs. And you know, I think there is a lot more opportunity for partnerships like that, formal and informal partnerships to be developed. And I think that's a challenge. I'm sitting here reflecting on how amazing it is that Imperial have actually moved in and said we want to develop that partnership. And I'm pretty sure that some of the other universities, you know, could learn from that on its own. But I think the big opportunity actually is to articulate what the excitement is that's growing in that industry in the borough. And at the moment, it's not a criticism, it's more of an opportunity, is that I think there's an opportunity for the industry hubs to lean in to skills providers, not just higher education, but I'm also going to include further education, the apprenticeship providers and training providers, but to lean in and actually explain to us what they see as being the future. Because I think, you know, learners, whether you're upskillers, reskillers or new skillers, are looking for excitement, for aspiration. You're looking towards the jobs and your career. And I think there's a lot more we can do to be explaining what that looks like to either the current employee who's going to upskill or the future employee who's learning their first set of skills for work and knowledge. So I would actually like the industrial hubs and the councils to be presenting these great concepts, and we saw Lloyd's earlier about Olympia, just bringing those into the education providers and exciting us, because then if we can get excited, then a number of things can flow from that. Firstly, research collaborations, which could continue to make West London an amazing place. So Imperial, Brunel, we've got some great universities, Imperial, Brunel, University of West London, Middlesex. I'm sure there's others just on the borders. And we're all currently working to create a civic engagement programme. So we're leaning in, we're looking to help industry do that, but actually it needs to be both ways. And the other thing is, the closer we get to what the opportunities are, the more likely it is that we'll excite and engage students and bring in more learners into the region, because they'll see those opportunities, not just from a learning perspective, but also from what they can go on and achieve through their jobs and their careers. And then if we can encourage them to stay, then we are building our own inclusive Indigenous communities that becomes a sustainable and future workforce. So I think I know there was a lot in that answer, but I think it's about communication and dialogue. And please tell us what you, the industries, think has been the big challenges, because I can tell you academics are a lot stuck in their research books and are looking for new things to inspire them.
Yeah, looking for that real world on the ground experience of what's actually needed out there in terms of attracting and keeping talent.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. Quickly out to our audience, please. Please start getting those questions in on the Q&A, as we're going to start putting those to the panel now. The first question actually that's come in is actually very relevant to the conversation we've just had with Katie, and it's actually a question for Lloyd. It says, thank you for a great presentation. It was very inspiring. And what pre-engagement can we do with youth and education sector to develop training opportunities? And I know that Olympia has a good commitment in those fields. So what can we all be doing more of to support training and opportunity?
Great. Thanks very much for the question. So we often ask the same question of local area community groups, employers, school systems, university systems, the same question. Because in the end, we don't want to make stuff up as we go. We'd rather just ask the people who know. And I think for us, the most important thing we have found from both the industry and the educational institutions is that the leap between pure education and employment, actual on-the-job training, is the biggest gulf that challenges everyone today, because unfortunately, a lot of people cannot afford to bring on new employees anymore. And people coming out of school are struggling to find proper employment. And if they're unable to get proper employment with job skills, it's even tougher if you've not even worked in the workforce yet and have job skills that you can say, well, I've done this for 3 to 5 years, I'm now looking to advance. And so one of the things that we have found a lot of people come talk to us about is, can you create kind of industry and educational programs, internships, mentorship programs, so that students can enter the workforce or find a way into the industry. And so that's been a big thing for us. So one of the things that we're focusing on at Olympia is pure education, which is, are there educational requirements in the industry that actually are not always served best in a true original classroom setting? So it's kind of a hybrid between going to class and going to work. And we think that we'll be making some announcements about industry-based education at Olympia in the kind of near medium term. We are working on it. That's number one. Number two is that one of the commitments we've made at Olympia is, in fact, to work with the various industries that are coming to find a permanent home at Olympia and ensuring that all of them are actually providing internship and mentorship programs to local area residents. It doesn't mean it'll 100% go to local area residents, but we have said it's important that the outreach be seen and benefit the local area residents. And so all of them have committed to do that within their respective businesses. And then thirdly, we've actually reached out in the creative industry sector to local area residents who have done incredibly well in their own businesses and said, if you were to find a program or a home at Olympia to do purely mentorship with these educational groups or as part of these wider corporate-based internship and mentorship programs, would you be interested? And some of them have been kind enough to give of their time and say, yes, if you had such a program, I would become a mentor to students or to young grads going through the system. And that for us has been very, very exciting. So we hope to be able to also announce corporate-based internship and mentorship programs at Olympia. And on top of that, name some very interesting and unique successful individuals who have agreed that they would themselves be mentors to identify young talent, to bring them through the system, to explain to them how to get from classroom into a monthly paying job in the industry. And that for us has been very exciting. And I think you'll find that for us has been the most direct route to delivering on that need.
That's really helpful. Thanks very much, Lloyd. I'm actually also going to say, do any other panelists want to come in on this issue? And I'm going to have a bit of a sidewinder question there, because I'm also interested, given we have more recruitment vacancies in the tech sector and the creative sectors, creative tech sectors going forward, looking at reskilling and upskilling people. I think it's coming out of some work that I've been doing on the impact that COVID has had on female workers and VAME. Who have obviously been disproportionately affected and had more job losses, partly because of the industries they work in and partly because of childcare issues. So given we've got talented and committed people there, is there anything that we can do to move them into careers where we are going to have more growth going forward. Open question there to anyone who would like to start.
I can chip in on that one if you want, Joanne. We already had a skills deficit in our industry already, before COVID, and it's certainly an area that we've got quite a few programs ourselves, and a lot of our other guilds, etc., in the industry already working on, and we have our screen sector skills organisation called Screen Skills, and who are obviously trying to bring in new talent. And we also have programs that are about getting typically carers, typically women, back into the industry, because they've got a lot of experience and training behind them. We want to get that back into the industry. So to be honest, from our point of view, regardless of COVID, that continues. What we're now starting to look at, and this is very pertinent for West London, is, as you say, those who are in industries, unfortunately, and particularly from our point of view, creative industries, where they can't get back to work. Events is a crucial one for me. Events is very similar in many ways to production industries in terms of the practical logistics factors. How do we start to take some of those events people and bring them to our industry? Because we do need more and more people with that kind of background, hardworking, long hours, and sort of understand that world. It's not too much of a jump. So we're trying to look at that now. But also typically we take on board all manner of types of skills and talent across the board. So we need carpenters, but we need accountants, we need financiers, we need lawyers. So you name it, you could probably be involved in the production industry one way or another regardless. Production Guild, for example, have had a running course that basically converts accountants into production accountants. It's very straightforward. And it's been running for years, and it's brilliant. So that's just one little example where we can just convert people who are on another trajectory, and we say, well, we've got the work coming our way.
That's great. I like that idea, and I love the concept that actually, of course, people tend to forget that the skills they've got in other industries are viable in any industry in many cases.
Can I jump in on that point? I mean, I've always loved the idea, and I have been talking to Bill Bowler, who I think is also on this call, about the creative enterprise zone in West London and how we can partner better and bring the players in West London, in the film, television sector better together. But I've always loved the idea that you can say I'm an accountant and I work in film. Makes it sound so much sexier. But the other more serious point is actually on apprenticeships. And, I know we've got a university on this call, and I myself, am partially employed by Imperial. But I think there's a wider point as we need to consider is manufacturing internships. Also, manufacturing apprenticeships have always been highly valued, seen as successful. And I come from a background in the aerospace and defense industry where, it's done incredibly well. And I think the question is, how do we translate some, these manufacturing apprenticeships? What can we learn from that, which can apply to the tech sector? So tech sector apprenticeships, how do we brand them? How do we sell them? And how do we actually persuade parents and teachers that this is a route you can take? You don't necessarily need to go to university. There's a great apprenticeship with a company, and you can work and study at the same time. And I think there's a communications piece to be done out there, as well as making sure we've got it right within the tech sector, that we are actually putting out apprenticeships that are of good value.
I quite agree. It's important that apprenticeships get that value, because they are the future, and they're going to be increasingly important, I think, as some of our youngsters come out of university or didn't make university in the first place, and there are fewer job opportunities available. So getting them practically trained, I think, is going to be critical to ensuring we can keep talent in the area.
Joe, just to pick up on that, if I can, we're doing quite a lot of work kind of in this space ourselves, because if we're trying to attract international companies into London, they don't know where to go to look for talent. Talent is a massive kind of strength of London. Its richness, its diversity, just the sheer scale of what's at your fingertips. But if you're an international company coming in for the first time, you don't know where to go. So your chances are you'll go down the tried and trusted route that you probably always kind of go to when you're looking to hire kind of teams in a new market. So what we've done at London & Partners is we've developed a talent toolkit, which is all about reaching out into other parts of the London ecosystems and societies to find really talented individuals that international companies otherwise wouldn't know existed. So into our BAME communities, into ex-forces, for example, coming out with some fantastic skills into the workplace, people that are returning to work, working with disability groups, and seeing how we can kind of access them and matchmake basically the talent that exists in those pools with the international companies that we're looking to attract into London. Because otherwise they'll just end up hiring people that kind of look like them and operating in the same verticals as them, and they won't really avail themselves of the richness of talent that London has to offer. So we're doing quite a lot of work in that space.
That's great. Okay, I would quite like us to move on because I am aware of time. I have a very quick question for Michelle, actually, which is you spoke a lot about space, and I've got a question coming in from the audience. Say, what is space? Because if you could define it, I don't know if there are people out there that might be able to help you with it.
Yeah, if Bill Boller is on this call, he knows my response to this is a nightmare because I'm very unclear on it, mostly because my industry is unclear on it. Right, so typically if you had a cluster of warehouses that were 20,000 square foot or so, and you had about 3 or 4 of them, I would be very interested in talking to you. They wouldn't be soundproofed. I'd want some soundproofing. I'd prefer it if they were really dark inside, and I'd really prefer it if they could get quite a few Arctic trucks to pull up to them and offload. That is my ideal. Ealing Studios, you'll know, West London Studios and down to Twickenham Studios don't necessarily have those big spaces, but that is what the SVODs are demanding of us at the moment. They like quite big spaces, and that's just all for the set builds, which you'll have all seen what a typical studio develops. On the side of that, we often need workshop space where a lot of the construction guys, carpenters who will work, build stuff just slightly out of the stage and then take it into the stage. So very practical, very logistical. Dagenham is the ideal example. Again, that's going to be about 6 sound stages of around about the 20,000. It will vary a little bit. Again, with a back lot, so a big open space at the back where you can create whatever. You can have a big tank of water, you can build your sort of green screen sets, etc., and do exterior shots. That's all an ideal, but I always appreciate West London is, you know, tough on the size of space. So a cluster of 10,000 square foot, but I'd need more like 3 or 4 of them together, again with that parking space. That will be of interest. We've got a classic example, you'll know HBO. I think most of you will probably know that HBO have got a converted warehouse in Park Royal, for example. So the guys are out there willing to sort of convert and invest a little bit and stay a little bit longer than ever before. But yes, it's a little bit, how long's a piece of string with me on that one?
Well, it's a very big ask. It's kind of interesting because you're obviously now looking for really, really big spaces, where the rest of us are looking at the commercial implications, perhaps people doing more home working, and the impact that that is going to have on space and perhaps hubs going forward, as people may choose to do more co-working or go home or have smaller office space. What do we think perhaps the opportunities and challenges are going to be like from that? Can I have someone else come in on that topic? I don't know, Prima, if that's a more appropriate question for you in terms of, does the way in which we've worked change affect how we have a business hub going forward?
Yes. I mean, we're going to be possibly in the office a little less. And I think what we're going to do is, as anybody who's had a child will find out, the one thing after having a child, you suddenly become a lot more efficient. You know, office time is bang, bang. You know, I get stuff done, I'm out because I want to see my kid. I think in a very similar vein, the amount of time we spend in the office may be lower, but it's going to be a heck of a lot more effective. We're going to be questioning, why am I here? What partnerships, what collaboration, what do I actually want to do? I'm not just going to sit at my desk, be quiet and just eat my lunch and then go home. It's going to be a lot more productive. So I think what we're going to see is, yes, you know, you may be in the office less, but I think the time you are in a particular location, you know, you're traveling into town, that you're going to use your location a lot more productively.
Thank you. I think it's an opportunity for West London as well, because I think it's back to that point, as if you've already got your facilities and your talent in that area, you have effectively created a virtual hub, if you like, that will hopefully be advantageous in terms of attracting people going forward. I'm aware that we're actually coming up on time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you each, if you could just summarise for me what you think is the key factor, the most important priority, I guess, that's needed to help our creative tech and science sectors thrive in West London. And I'm very deliberately going to go to Lloyd first, because I really know he has to leave on time. So I want to make sure that he manages to contribute to that one before he has to head off to his next meeting.
Sure, thanks very much. Look, I think in the end, there's always two things that happen around growth. And one is investment, and the other is what are you investing into to grow? And I think the confluence of those two is what these kinds of forums are about, which is people need capital, they need investment, they need infrastructure, just kind of like what Michelle was just outlining. By the way, Michelle, we'd love to learn more about that. And I think that to the extent that at these forums, people can say, I need this. I need someone to invest and do this. And by the way, if you do, this is what I can deliver that you cannot deliver. That is what these things are about, right? It's about bringing people together so that collectively we actually can deliver things that no one of us can do on our own. So for us, we're very keen to hear from people who have requirements for physical delivery. That's what we are. We're real estate people, and also who need investment into those kinds of buildings and those kinds of operations.
And if you had a number one priority for West London, what would it be?
Look, I think as a real estate guy, I'm slightly biased by what I think London needs. London, I think, benefits from, geographic location, the fact that it's a capital city, all those things. But in the end, the infrastructure actually is quite old. And on the one hand, we celebrate and we very much want to preserve a lot of the heritage that makes London such a special city. But at the same time, you really have to work twice as hard then to enable it to have the facilities that you're going to need 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, when the world's demands will become far more sophisticated, more advanced for state-of-the-art stuff. And I think the best thing that we can do as Londoners is support each other in that vision and be bold, slightly unafraid to know that we have to basically reconcile with the beauty and the heritage that we have, and we have an obligation to polish, and at the same time be bold in the fact that London does have to move into the 21st and 22nd centuries, and therefore we have to be unafraid to deliver some of the things that we know we really need to deliver to make it continue to be such a great city.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Lloyd, if I don't get to say thank you again before you have to leave, and I suspect we're going to overrun a little bit. Can I move over to Katie? What about you? What do you think are our top priorities in order to sustain the growth that we have in West London?
Well, it's sort of building on sort of what Lloyd's been said there, but I think I think we need to be better at communicating what the opportunity is in West London. And then part B of that is, and then how people can be part of creating that future.
Like that. So yes, people, communication, infrastructure, all of those key things that are needed to drive forward. Michelle, what would be your choice here?
From a selfish point of view, again, it comes down to space for me. But as the above, I think fluidity of working, I think particularly from local authorities, as Lloyd says, we need to be entrepreneurial, and we need to sort of start moving quite quickly. And I think now we're all working on Zoom calls, we can all literally move a lot quicker. And I think if we can just get a little bit faster and react quicker, because the world we're moving into doesn't slow down. So I think from that point of view, just to perhaps be a bit more systematic, be able to sort of act and move quickly, not just from a local authority point of view. The construction industry, the property developing industry is pretty slow compared to my world, and that's quite frustrating. So I think if that could just shuffle along a little bit quicker, that would help a lot.
Okay, we need speed. Rima, would you like to come in on this one? What are the priorities from your perspective in terms of making sure we can sustain our growth?
I'm not going to talk about a priority per se. I think I'd like to talk about we need to inject a bit more resilience into what we do across the board. And I think, what the pandemic has shown is that we're not that resilient. Obviously, it was in some sense, a shock very few of us, apart from the National Security Council, probably expected. So, but if such shocks are going to happen on a irregular or regular basis, I think we need to consider, click finger, what are we going to do? What is our backup plan? So we don't fall flat on our faces ever again, or certainly not to the same extent. So resilience for me is a concept I think we need to inject into all our plans. And I think what I really liked about this forum, which I think Lloyd has mentioned, is the fact that, ask for what you need and see if there's somebody who can partner with you, can collaborate with you, or who could invest in you. And we also run a deep tech network. And, there's a great element of it that is very much, we're a great community. It's a very cohesive community. And it's very much put up your hands, ask, I need help on this. And you actually get people coming forward. And that for me is, is both beautiful and also fulfills the bottom line. There we are.
Thank you. Finally, can I go over to you, Neil? Same question, really. What's our focus going forward?
What's left to kind of say? I kind of agree with everything that's gone before, but I think for me, just a couple of things. In the short term, I think for us as an organisation, when clients can't come to us, we've got to take the offer to them, and we've got to take it in a really compelling way that stands out from the noise and the crowd. So at a time when clients can't come and see London for themselves, we've got to take it to them virtually, whether that's through virtual trade missions that we at London Partners are doing, virtual site tours, all sorts of kind of digitally delivered services to our investors, and making sure that we get our messaging right, and making sure that message is sensitive and cognizant of the situation that we're working through. We've got to update our messaging so that it reflects the new reality. So it's about, being agile and taking our offer to market in the short term. Longer term, for me, it's kind of come up a couple of times already. It's around kind of talent. And we talk about sectors and we talk about, the convergence of sectors, but actually what makes companies come to London is the fantastic talent that's here. And why is the talent here? It's because the lifestyle is fantastic. It's because the cultural offer is great. The heritage is fantastic. All of that kind of adds up to a place where, young guys and girls want to locate, want to work. So we've got to make sure that we kind of get some energy back into our local economies that attract that kind of talent of the future. And then the final thing, just if I may, is really around, and again, it's come up, it's this almost this circular kind of piece around, if we're not getting visitors and international visitors into the city right now, they are the students of the future. Those students are the entrepreneurs of the future. Those entrepreneurs are the investors of the future. So the quicker we can kind of get that kind of visitor economy going, and I'm absolutely cognizant of everything, all the challenges around that at the moment, but the long-term structural kind of impact of that, we won't know for years. But if we can re-energize that kind of visitor economy, we will get those businesses of the future, and we will get that kind of diverse and richness of our cultural and lifestyle offer that underpins everything that we do.
Well, thank you very much, Neil. We're coming towards a close now, so I'm just going to put a quick shout out. I know some of our attendees joined us a little late because they were coming from another session. If you want to hear Mark Easton's closing speech, because you may have missed it, one of my colleagues is going to put the link into the chat now. So if you want to catch that in a few minutes once we've finished here, please click on the link that's going into the chat now. In the meantime, I'd like to thank all our speakers very much for what has been actually one of the most inspiring sessions that I've had the pleasure of chairing in the past 6 months. We started with an enormous amount of positivity around many of the sectors which are thriving particularly well in West London. Things are still happening. As Michelle said, we have companies coming in looking for long-term leases. Neil talked about the direct investment that's still coming into London. And I think to summarise what you've all been saying recently, it's clear that West London has the talent. It definitely has the resilience. It definitely has the offer. We may need to communicate it better, but it's all there ready to communicate. And I think that therefore it has that positioning to be that global hub that drives forward economic benefit for everybody. Because what we also seem to have here is a fantastically collaborative group who are very enthused and committed to working across the community and across all sectors of the community to engage and create that lovely virtual circle where if we all help each other, we do in fact achieve more than the sum of our parts. So thank you very much to everybody who's joined us today. It's been fantastic to have you all here. I'm going to manage to finish just for once exactly on time. So thank you all. And if there are any questions we didn't get around to or any comments you want to make, they will all go around in the chat afterwards. So Thank you, all of you.